All right, thank you guys for joining us today. We're here with Jason Towns, managing director of Groundwork Ventures. What's going on, Jason?
Hey man, how are you? How are you?
I'm
Doing all
doing
right.
I'm doing well. I know you've been in this space, the entrepreneurial space, for over a decade now, and you started Groundwork just a few years ago. Tell us a little bit about, give us your elevator pitch of what Groundwork Ventures is.
Yeah. Groundwork Ventures is an organization that seeks to find, support, and fund early stage entrepreneurs from communities that are often overlooked by the broader venture and tech investment ecosystem. And aside from that, and working really closely with entrepreneurs, we aim to support the growth of stronger and more diverse entrepreneurial ecosystems by building out programming in a number of cities with the hopes that moving forward, the problems that we're looking to solve aren't problems that need to be solved anymore. And so,
Sure.
that's the big picture. We think that by working far on the right side with getting folks funded and into top accelerators and getting the type of capital that they need to bridge that friends and family gap is a big piece. And far on the left side, on the other side, we think that really just working at the grassroots level and making sure that we're creating the environment locally in cities that allows for the support of entrepreneurs from a broader segment of the population just makes sense for everybody involved.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah.
So you're based in both DC and Oakland.
Yep.
Both NBA teams are in the playoffs right now. Um, if
Yep.
it had to be the Warriors versus the Wizards, who would you
Oh,
choose?
so actually, everybody's gonna hate me for this, but I'm actually a diehard Knicks fan, unfortunately. And I see the look on your face. It's like, okay, what's going on
You
here?
you live in two winning cities right now, and you like the
I
Knicks.
know.
Come on, man.
I'm a ride or die man. I'm a ride or die guy. Born in Queens, New York. Grew up in Brooklyn before moving down to the DC metropolitan area, and have stuck with New York teams.
That's important that you stick to it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
d-
Unfortunately, but yeah,
Define overlooked communities.
yeah. So I think that we can look at that from a number of different perspectives. For us, we're looking at it in terms of uh, gender, ethnic, and looking at it in terms of ethnicity, but also we're looking at it in terms of geography, and I'll explain that. So, you have founders who are, in the middle of the country or far on the East Coast. So we're looking at from DC on down to the South. Amazing founders who are doing really cool stuff and building on ideas that they feel really passionately about, but because they're not so connected to the Valley or to New York or to Boston, where the lion's share of venture deals are going down, a lot of times we have folks who are just really disconnected from that space, and so they have a tremendous time looking to raise the capital that they need, particularly early on. And so when you layer that on top of what we see around, gender and ethnicity, for instance, I think the last numbers look like less than 2% of venture capital goes to founders from the African American community. So when you couple not being close in proximity to where the deals are going down, and also being from a community that's just disconnected and overlooked, it creates a very, very interesting problem to solve. From the way we look at it, instead of looking at it as this huge problem to solve, we look at it as a tremendous opportunity where we have really amazing founders that we can work to get connected to capital. We recognize that folks that we're working with, in our opinion, are probably the biggest opportunity in the investment space, just because there's such a huge disparity that exists right now. So it ends up being really amazing founders that have the ability to turn into really great deals. And for us, I guess on top of everything else, the big picture is if we don't create an opportunity and create a community that does look to support and take advantage of the opportunities that exist in these communities, we're going to miss out on tremendous problems that are getting solved because most of these folks are building problems that they see, whether it's in their own community or in their own experience. And if we don't handle that,
So they don't know that they're so you just said 2% of African American founders are less than 2% of African American founders are typically the ones that are funded, but because those businesses are not. They're solving problems that they don't see because they're not having those conversations. We're not even building to a future that you guys can. So there's a huge hole in the market there, and they don't even know it because they're not even funding those businesses
absolutely.
as it is.
Yeah, no, some huge gaps that we're recognizing, and a lot of those gaps are being filled by these founders. But because of a number of structural issues that we can or can't get into on this call, those gaps are going to remain unfilled until folks like us and a number of others. You have Arlen Hamilton of Backstage Capital, who's doing some amazing stuff. Monique Woodard at 500 Startups has launched their fund that's focusing specifically in this space as well. So there's some energy that's coming along now. But unless we all do a better job of really nailing these gaps, they're going to be just big gaping holes in the space that aren't being accounted for.
This is great. So they don't even know the holes that are there. So are you familiar with the guy who started Bevel?
Yeah, absolutely. Tristan Walker is a big inspiration to everybody. I actually used to work for Code 2040, which Tristan co-founded with Laura Powers.
What's it
Two
called?
of them are amazing folks. Code 2040.
I'll ask you a little bit about that in a moment. So what I watched. This is what I learned about Bevel and Tristan Walker maybe 2 years ago. He was on This Week in Startups with Jason, and it was really interesting. It was right around when Dollar Shave Club was getting really big.
That's
and so Bevel, for those of you who don't know, it's high scale razors for people with a lot of razor bumps, which are traditionally African Americans, I guess. And it was really fascinating. And one of the things that I thought was really, really interesting is it seems like, and I've never met this guy, so this is only from the story that I heard, but it seems like Tristan went and worked for a large venture firm and really understood the ropes and became accustomed to that. And then when he was ready and knew that pain point was there, even though, me as a white guy, I don't see that as an issue, right? He went in and said, look, we see this, right? I'm living this every day. And it was really interesting to me because I never thought of that, but it's really filling that gap that you're talking about, saying, hey, you guys don't even know the problems that are here. There's billions of dollars there available.
That's right.
Open the door.
That's right. And so, I think you nailed it. I mean, Tristan, identified a really interesting and huge market opportunity there with Walker & Co., which is Bevel is the first brand that they've launched, with which they have plans on launching a number of other brands that are attacking different segments of the market. But the interesting thing about it is that, he built a company to serve, the gap that he saw that existed because of the problems that, that black men experience, men of color experience with, having curlier hair and dealing with ingrown hairs. What they found, though, is that the value proposition resonates with so many folks, even outside of the community. So you're building a product to serve unmet need in your own community, and you recognize that there's this huge group of folks who have the same problem that may not have identified in the same way. So it's interesting what they're doing. So they started out with the shaving system, and now then recently released a trimmer, and so that's like the electric hair shaver, and they have a number of other products down the pipeline. And for me, as the consumer, what it's interesting about Bevel to me is that when I walk through a Target, for instance, Bevel is literally the first time that I could walk through a store and see a high-end product that's targeted directly to me as the consumer. I
Wow.
just don't remember seeing that in big box stores, ever, to be honest. I mean, as a black guy, we're used to going and getting whatever things that we need, and either we're buying the general market product, which is cool sometimes, but also when you're looking at the products that are targeted towards us, it's extremely it's the really old, like dusty packaging. The photo shoot on the box was taken in 1978 sometime. The guy has like a Jerry curl, and it doesn't really
Well,
speak
maybe that'll
to.
come back, right? Maybe that's.
Yeah, possibly. Who knows? But it doesn't really speak to today's consumer. So I think they've recognized and capitalized on a huge opportunity. I
Yeah.
mean, it's this novel thing. Black people spend money on hair care and grooming, and just like everyone else. So I'm interested in looking at the ways that other companies are leveraging
Yeah.
that same type of thought process behind what they're building.
It's really interesting, and you and I have had a couple conversations now. I've never heard something like that articulated like the way you said, where basically it's, hey, there's a lot of opportunity here in our community, and no one even knows about it, and we're just trying to get that out.
That's right.
And then we even talk about Bevel, who wasn't even thinking about talking about today, but it reminded me of them. And then
Right.
obviously you're a big fan. It's just really interesting. We don't even understand what we're missing out because we haven't even gone to those places yet.
That's right.
Now, uh, I, people are afraid of change, right? People are afraid of going to places that they might not know what's going to look like. And if you say the news represents the black community one way, and then people look at that and say, well, this is all that it is because I see it every night. Like, how do you go in and try and get those same news reporters to give you
Mhm.
guys a positive voice, and then
Mhm.
give those communities that might have a lot of those issues to understand that, hey, not only is entrepreneurship a venture that you can go into, but it might be the best one for you to do, um, because you control it to some
Mhm.
extent.
Yeah. So one of the things that and this brings up another company that we've worked with. One of the things that has to happen, honestly, is that communities are going to have to really take control of the narrative. I frankly don't think that the news, the mainstream media, is going to do the best job in the time frame that we're talking about of communicating what the reality is in communities of color, for instance. And so, in terms of creating and building our own narrative, um, one of the companies that comes to mind, a good friend of mine, Morgan DeBon, runs a company called Blavity, Blavity. An amazing, amazing company. You could look at it as almost the Huffington Post for the Black millennial, and very interesting, similar to the Bevel situation in some ways. They built a product that puts out really amazing content targeted to the Black millennial. But what they found over time is that the market for what they're doing is really wider than just the Black millennial.
Right.
And so they do an amazing job of pushing out content that represents our community in a way that's true and makes sense. And they found some interesting ways to monetize that. So
So is it basically saying that as one, it started basically to be, let's just call it media for black people, and then now
yep,
they've really understood that, well, that was our in, but
yep.
actually that's not who our target is now. It's different.
Well,
Is that what you're saying?
so no, I think that it is the target. I
Okay.
think one of the things that's interesting about them is that they stay squarely focused on that target. But interestingly enough, other folks are just super interested in the same content that they're targeting
Gotcha.
to Black folks. And so, for instance, when you look at the memes that you'll see on Twitter and on Instagram, a lot of those are started in the Black community, and so everyone may kind of love some of these things and maybe get some joy out of some of these things, and a lot of them start in a number of core communities. So I think with Blavity, they're helping to better represent communities that don't necessarily have the best representation in mainstream media. And I mention them mostly just to say, the way that we're going to see, let's just say, the Black community better represented. The mainstream media may begin to do a better job as they recognize that, hey, we're going to have to if we want to keep this customer. But the reality is, I think, Black folks are going to have to create media, and to continue creating content that represents the community, as it wants to be seen and as it wants to be heard. And so I think Blavity is one company that's doing an amazing job of that. And honestly, anybody, can jump in and take a look at the website and either get a laugh or a smile or learn something new. I don't think you have to be a Black person to appreciate the website itself. And that's the direction that I see things going in. And so when I ended up talking to Morgan early on, while she was just trying to kind of pull some cash together to get this thing going, it immediately resonated with me and, helped them make some moves. And she's going off, and her and the company are doing amazing now, raised about $1 million, I believe, maybe a little more than that. And they're just doing amazing stuff right now, an amazing example of what can happen. But yeah, I'm a big fan of taking that route to making sure that the right messages are out there.
I'm pulling up the site now. I'm looking forward to checking it out.
Yeah.
Later. So one thing that I've heard over time is that, and I want to articulate this in a way that is not going to be taken the wrong way,
Sure.
but is by creating another silo, by doing an only female group, an only Black group, does that actually help, and how do you kind of intertwine when it's there? Because to me, when I grew up, we didn't really have those issues the same way. I was telling my friend, I grew up in a suburb of Washington D.C., and he's like, "Oh, it was super white." I'm like, actually, if you go look at the data, whites are the minorities in here. So I haven't seen some of the things, but I'm interested in. So like, how do you connect those people if you're creating a singular silo to make it so you can?
Yep. No, that's actually a great question. So after moving from Queens to Brooklyn and then Brooklyn down to Silver Spring, Maryland, grew up in Montgomery County, Maryland, and probably, the most diverse zip code in the country, if not one of the top 10. And so
which was that? What's the most diverse?
I think it's one of the most diverse. I think it's
what city is it? Queens?
Silver Spring.
Oh, Silver Spring. Okay.
Maryland. Yep. And so Montgomery County, Maryland. And so similar to what you're saying, I've had, for the majority of my life, friends from every community, and have appreciated the differences in cultures, and, going to this friend's house and trying West African food, and being at this friend's house, and his grandmother's German, and, I'm over here, and, over at my house, and, we're Black. And so just being able to appreciate the differences in cultures, to me, it's been interesting to see that so much of the business community, and then when we look at the tech community, operates really differently than what feels natural to me. What I think in terms of what we're building, and for any of these groups that you can initially take a look at and see a siloed group, I think if we take a deeper look, what we're doing is a couple of things. One, we're recognizing that, there's some very specific needs in the communities that we're looking to serve that may be a little different than just general market needs. And so by targeting specifically, we get the opportunity to dial down and really look to meet those needs. But I think the part that you're alluding to is one of the other things that we do, and that we take, that we're really passionate about, is making sure that we're connecting the entrepreneurs in our network to entrepreneurs in other networks, and that we're building the type of relationships that allow people to have as diverse and as broad of a network as they can. At the end of the day, there are going to be very specific needs for women or for African Americans or for veteran entrepreneurs. I have a buddy of mine who runs an accelerator for veterans, and there's some very specific and interesting needs and
Yeah.
opportunities that
Yep.
exist only for veterans. So, being able to leverage those very niche opportunities and needs, but also with a thought process to help folks build as broad of a network as they can while they do have this base over here. I think it makes a lot of sense. What I will say though is that because we're taking the approach that we're taking, I've taken on the understanding that it's going to be a much harder road to for fundraising for the work that we're doing and for getting the institutional capital on board. And so for things like that, a lot of the pain points end up not lying on the entrepreneur, but end up lying on myself and my
Right.
team. And that's just something that we've talked a lot about, and I'm taking on. I've spent the last couple of months, out in the valley fundraising, and it's not, a fun situation. I mean, very similar to how entrepreneurs in our communities end up running into these walls. What we're doing with Groundwork is I'm actually taking on running into a lot of those walls for founders so that, years down the line, hopefully we would have carved out a path
Yeah.
to where nobody has to bang their head on the wall in the same way anymore. But as of right now, that ends up being me banging mine. And, it's something that I'm willing
I'm
to
the
take
same
on.
way a little bit. I feel like I've banged
Yeah,
my head a
yeah, no,
couple of
I'm
times.
bleeding over here, but I believe in what we're doing, and I'm happy to have a community behind us that believes in what we're doing. A really diverse group of folks from the Valley to DC to even some work we're doing in Durban, South Africa.
Cool.
I'm blessed to have a great group of people that believes in what we're doing, but it's literally the hardest thing I've
But
ever
you love
done
it,
professionally.
and I can tell.
Huh?
You love it,
Yeah,
and I can
yeah,
tell, and I
I
can
do.
see. And if you don't love something, like I was telling someone, whether it's today maybe, I was like, dude, if you don't love this, don't do it. Like,
Absolutely.
you can have a bad day, you can have a couple bad weeks, but if like you start waking up and you're like, I don't want to do this,
That's right.
like you're not going to be able to get through in those tough times.
That's right.
I,
That's
I,
right.
what do you do with the founders or the people that want to start a business that don't want to start a tech business, that might want to start a beauty salon or a local 7-Eleven, not that
Yeah.
that sounds like an oxymoron really, like a local convenience store, like someone that's
Yeah.
not doing something with tech. Maybe they use technology to run their business, but how do you guys kind of program and help those type of folks?
Yeah, absolutely. So interestingly, this goes back to the question around, are there any, like benefits to operating a program that's relatively siloed in terms of the communities that we're looking to solve? So, from our standpoint, I think what separates us from the majority of the folks who are in the venture space, or we are taking a look very squarely at communities of color and where the opportunities lie for us to support. And for us, look, we can do all of the work that we're doing to support, Black tech founders, and we've helped a number of folks get into top accelerators and land seed rounds, and I'm always excited to do that. I mean, we have literally a few dozen folks who are doing amazing work now because of the work that we've done. But no matter what, we'll never get away from the fact that the reality is the majority of jobs that are created in our communities are never going to come from the tech industry.
Mm-hmm.
The jobs are going to come from small, like you just mentioned, mom and pop businesses, brick and mortar businesses. That's the cornerstone of strength in our communities. And if we're going to do the best job that we can do to continue strengthening those communities, then it's going to always be on us to make sure that we're finding ways to support that as well.
Yeah.
And so even though we do a lot of our work around the tech piece, we spend a lot of time thinking through and supporting folks who are, raising money to open up a bakery, or, you've got 5 employees at this company and you want to get to 15 by 2019, and what's that growth plan look like? So we don't push anybody away. We take a different approach, slightly, but also what's interesting is that there's a lot of what applies to the way that we help scale tech companies that can also be applied in a similar fashion to mom and pop and to brick and mortar businesses. And so we take a strong look there as well.
One thing that I can't understand, I can't comprehend, is
Hmm.
that you get these politicians, you get these leaders, you get all these people that talk about all the jobs are in startups, all the jobs are, they're in small businesses. But then they go on
Yep.
and they basically don't tout those people. They don't give them the use this word. They don't give them a narrative. They don't give them a vision. They don't give them an option. And yet,
That's right.
the brand down the street that moved 2,000 miles and was given $25 million is the one that people
That's
talk
right.
about. I
That's
call it
right.
whale hunting. Some people call it different things.
Yep.
And one of the reasons why, you're on the 1004 show, and
Hmm.
the numbers mean something, right? The numbers mean that small business that never got an opportunity, like
Hmm.
we're giving them something.
That's
About
right.
4 years ago, I was sitting in a jobs summit for my community,
Yep.
and this guy, I sat there for 45 minutes, and these people were talking, and I was a relative nobody at that point, but I was invited to go to this meeting of 45 people or so, and someone's
Hmm.
like, all our region needs is to recruit 4 large businesses with 1,000 employees each. That's going to be great. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, where do you think that makes sense? I just written a book about community building, and basically what I was learning, not only from our community but other communities, is that there's tiers, right? So you
Yeah.
need small, medium, large businesses, service providers. You might need a little bit of capital. You might need some schools in there. You need people. You need density. There's all these pieces. And this person was like, no, all we need is we need a whale hunt, 4 businesses, 1,000 employees, and everything will be fine. And I was like, what if we flipped flop that and
Hmm.
helped grow 1,000 businesses? Let's just say an average of 4 employees, right?
Yep.
Not only do you have 1,000 businesses there because it's from a diversity standpoint, it's better than 4, but
Hmm.
also you're not having this fake business come in. And granted, look, if we all ever could be big, we would do that. And I understand people are playing this game, but like you have 1,000 business owners now, 3,000 employees instead of 4 business owners and 3,996 employees. It's just a game of simple math. And if you think about when people talk about in sales how it's easier to retain a client than it is to attract a new one, it's the same
Hmm.
concept. What's in your backyard? What's a little bit of money that you can provide them, and see what
Yep.
happens. I was literally at a luncheon today,
Yep.
and I brought up the point like, hey, you guys just gave $25 million to this company, and it's supposed to create a couple thousand jobs. What if you gave that couple thousand, that couple $1 million, $25 million or whatever it was, to a couple thousand businesses?
That's right.
What would
That's,
happen there?
that's
Well,
right.
it's we don't really think that way. I'm like, well, maybe you should start.
That's
And I
right.
get in these arguments with economic development people, and I'm like, you just told me your small business community needs something, and you don't
Hmm.
understand why they don't get it from you.
Yep.
You don't give them love,
That's
right?
right.
All this stuff, like the progression of what we're doing, is only because people aren't doing it. They
That's
say
right.
one thing, do another thing. And I hear it every single day. I'm sure you hear it every day. It's like, I just need a voice. And you know what?
Yeah.
Sometimes you realize that what you're really good at is that voice, and you just start telling people.
That's
And,
right.
we want people to adopt 1004 and realize it is kind of the for people, by the people type of piece, right? I interviewed Damon John a couple years ago, and learning a
Hmm.
lot about him. It's kind of the same thing. Like he wanted to be able to provide urban wear for people. And it
Hmm.
just so happened that was people of black people that were in urban communities. And
That's right.
it just like, just because something was done one way before doesn't mean that's the way that it should be there. And I think the dollar amount with whale hunting is something like they return 10 cents on the dollar. So this thing that they think they're going to return doesn't even return but
Right.
10 cents on every dollar.
Yeah,
And I
man.
literally have gotten in fights with economic development directors where they're like, you're wrong. You don't know what we're doing. I'm like, okay, prove me wrong. Like,
Right.
I want these businesses to survive.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is give them a little bit of love. Do a
Yeah.
freaking ribbon cutting for them. Tell people, but you don't even do that. And they get so much more love for these big companies than they do the small guy. Well, it's like, this guy fought through your downturn. Like, you're
That's
like,
right.
why
That's
didn't
right.
you help them?
That's
And
right.
so I don't even know what the question was. I got on my rant. I
Yeah. No.
love
No. No.
talking about that,
No.
but it's
You're
just
preaching, man. You're
it's
preaching,
it's
and
frustrating that these businesses then fail because they couldn't even get a similar
Mhm.
opportunity to someone else.
It's
And
ridiculous.
it's I totally feel the frustration with you. And I love
Yeah.
what you said about
It's
communities needing to take control of your narrative. I think that's so good. I was talking to someone today. We say something called Hustle City.
hmm
Um, and I started it because I don't even remember the exact ties to it. I think it had something to do with Brock Lesnar from the WWE, and then something with City, or Hustle from someone, maybe even Gary Vaynerchuk.
uh-huh.
I don't think
I
so,
like the content that Gary Vee puts out.
but he does it
Yeah.
right.
That's right.
I've stopped watching Gary Vaynerchuk because
Okay.
you can't
Yeah.
watch him and run a business, right?
That's
So
right. That's
I
right.
used to follow him. I unfollowed him. Sorry, Gary Vaynerchuk. Like, someone the other day on my team was like, "Hey, Gary just said, hey, what are some small business podcasts to be on?" And so I had to go in and literally, I didn't see it because I wasn't doing
Mhm.
it live.
Right.
Because look, at some point you realize that, and he would probably respect this. He would be
That's
like,
right.
"Good, you're doing what I want you to do."
Yep.
And sometimes it's just nice to see some other people doing some things and be
That's
like,
right.
"Oh, okay, well, maybe that's how I do it."
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so,
That,
how does someone
mhm.
actually? Let's define two things first. So, what do
Sure.
you define as an entrepreneur?
Mm. An entrepreneur, I think someone who recognizes a big problem or market opportunity and sees opportunity in solving that in some repeatable fashion.
Got it.
That's what I see as entrepreneur.
And a startup ecosystem is what?
A startup ecosystem, a group of people, organizations, businesses working together with one common goal to support that community. And I think to back to the last piece that you were talking about, I think one of the big pieces that the economic development people often get wrong is where we put so much weight on attracting these big, huge companies that are going to drain. There's the big jobs piece that I think everybody jumps at immediately, but when we talk about an ecosystem, it's how do the big businesses impact the smaller ones, impact the entrepreneurs, impact the students who are in the universities, the students in the high schools. How do all of these things work in a way to support one another, as opposed to just let's toss all of our cash at trying to retain these two huge behemoths? Which, by the way, if either one of them decides to leave, that's tons of resources that we put into getting them here right out the door. Or if one of them decides to fail, I won't mention any companies, but there's been a bunch of cities that have tried to attract this big, sexy startup. The startup fails, and now that's millions and millions and millions of dollars down the drain that could have been there supporting the smaller, slower growing business that's going to be there for 30 years.
There is a community in South Carolina, I believe. I'm going to fudge the numbers and concept a little, but let's say about 5 years ago, they were provided, I think, $120 million to create, I don't know, 2,000 jobs. Let's
Okay.
fast forward 4 years. 1,998 of those jobs, of the 2,000, were laid off. And there's something like maybe let's say 10 jobs available left, and each of those
Wow.
jobs was basically a $20 million job. So
Wow.
I've yet to hear a success story from a whale hunt perspective.
That's right.
Um, and I understand why they do it. I understand that,
Mhm.
they want to support communities and do those things, but it's like, what do you have in your community that you're going to lose by doing this too?
Yep.
And I think if you don't have haters and you don't have people that want to push back against you, you probably don't
Yep.
have something yet. And so when people are like,
Yep.
"Oh, you're doing this is stupid," I'm like, "Cool, you don't get it. Like, you
Yeah.
don't live this life, right?" It's like you saying that people don't understand that in the black community, there's a lot of opportunities that people aren't trying to tackle yet because
That's right.
people don't know about it.
That's
And
right.
so, to me, it's like we talk about small business. It's Small Business Week,
Yeah.
right? And what are we actually doing to support it? Are we just doing some like some balloons with the SBA, or are we doing something for real? Like we
That's
need
right.
52 weeks out of the year,
That's right.
and we're passionate and trying to help those businesses.
That's right.
Um, so I love what you said about an entrepreneur and startup ecosystems, and I love how you guys are actually being able to tackle and understanding and recognizing this, because I think so many people don't, is that not all the businesses are tech, and I
No.
think tech gets a lot of love. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of businesses are using tech, whether it's a
Yeah.
Square Up or a PayPal or some sort of
Yeah.
CRM. But that
I
doesn't
think
mean
we're
that they're
moving.
what they actually do is that.
Not absolutely no. I think we're moving to a place where almost every business is going to be tech enabled at the very least.
Mm.
But everything isn't going to ever be a tech startup per se. And just because tech is the sexy thing right now doesn't mean that everybody has to jump into that same lane. That's one of the things I end up talking to a lot of entrepreneurs about, early stage entrepreneurs. I get folks who are, running successful businesses and figuring out how do they pivot their model into what would be considered a tech startup. And for the most part, if there's some way that technology can enable you to do your job better, great. But do you take your entire model and try to find a way to turn it into a tech startup? I don't think
Just
that makes
because
a
it's
lot of
sexy
sense.
and that's what people say.
I
Yeah.
think because there's so much capital tied to tech startup, that term, people start to figure out that, hey, maybe I can attract more cash if this thing is seen as a tech startup as opposed to, this chain of stores that I'm running.
Well, it's interesting. So 1004, it's an online platform.
Yep.
We educate and help build communities across the country and those businesses in them.
Mhm.
And, I think people in my community don't understand that it's probably a high growth tech startup. They just can't get out of their own head. I'm not
Mm,
interested in raising capital. I'm not interested in having a partner or anything like that. I got a small team behind me, but I
mhm,
understand that my voice and my team's
mhm.
voice can connect with people like you, and then we
Yep.
can take that and get even bigger. And so it's
Absolutely.
something that you don't need capital to introduce yourself to someone, and so many
That's right.
people forget to do that instead of actually growing. Tell me about Code 2040 though.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm always excited to talk about Code 2040.
Is it still around?
So yeah, yeah. Code 2040 is an amazing organization based in the Bay, but supporting students and professionals in this space from all over the country. So the official, I guess, elevator pitch would be Code 2040 creates access, awareness, and opportunities for the top Black and Latino engineering talent to ensure their leadership in the innovation economy. And so, in short, the organization taps the top, computer science and engineering students from a number of schools, brings them out to the Bay
Mm-hmm.
every summer, connects them with amazing internships, but outside of the internships, also creates this community where they offer leadership skills and helping the students build the types of networks that they're going to need to ensure that these kids are going to be the leaders in this industry as we move forward. So
Is that
when
what
you look at
2040 is for? So that when they get to 2040 the year, or is it something different?
2040 is 2040 is the year that there's the majority minority flip in this country, and so the thought
Wow.
process is how do we prepare our country and the tech industry for the rapidly changing demographics. And so 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, you're going to see, some of the top talent in the industry that are, building organizations, working in executive roles in organizations that are probably going to be Code 2040 alumni. And so this is the organization that's creating the support that's needed to help those young people navigate this industry to get to that place where they're able to lead. And also, what I came on board at Code 2044, which is also really interesting and exciting, is to help build out the entrepreneurship platform. And so, outside of what Code 2040 does with the young engineers, very similarly, Code 2040 supports a cohort of entrepreneurs across the country from Black and Latino backgrounds, and so providing seed capital, also access to the resources that exist here in the valley, and through the networks that are being built. So if you're a entrepreneur in Durham, North Carolina, you have access to Code 2040's amazing network in the Valley. So you're talking about working with the team at Google for entrepreneurs and working with other investors and stakeholders in the industry. But you're incented to continue building your company in your community, and also on top of that,
cool.
will also support you in building programming in that community, so that it's not just you that's going to be on this rocket ship to success. You're also in a position to empower those who are in your community locally as well. So works out really well. Being run by some amazing folks. It's an organization I'm happy to be connected to, and I'm always excited to talk about it anytime I have the opportunity to.
It's very cool, and I love the 20. I always love it when numbers mean something.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought it was actually going to be like 2040 is like, this is when these kids will be, I don't know, a certain age and whatnot. So where are we in the world of, like, is this stuff really changing? Right? Are people like, are females or blacks in tech? Are we starting to see a little bit of a change? Are we seeing it in kids where they're doing, like, does it seem like we're making a big impact and it seems like it's going to continue? Or do you guys have to go into younger ages and really say, okay, like where, like, what's the status report? And does it seem like the numbers are going to be in the favor to really show the results that you guys want, or in your favor?
Yeah, that's also a great question. So I think the answer is twofold. On one, I'll just give you a really just blunt and honest answer. Is the industry and are the stakeholders who are responsible for kind of ushering in the change in the industry, are folks satisfied with the change that's happened thus far over the last, I'd say, half a decade of really, I guess, intense work around inclusion? I'd say, and this is just me speaking as an individual, not speaking for anyone else, but I'd say, no, I'm not super satisfied with where we are today in terms of just overall diversity and inclusion efforts. A couple of things there, though. One, for some of these larger companies, particularly the larger tech companies, it's literally going to take a much longer time, I think, for there to be the culture shifts needed to really make the changes that I think everybody's expecting to happen. So I do think that.
Do you set a metric to that? Or is it a feel?
So I mean, we can look at, from a metric standpoint, over the last couple of years, a number of the top tech companies have started to put out their diversity reports. So how many hires around African American and Latina, and also some folks are starting to put out metrics around ability and age and veteran hires as well.
Sure. And
to be honest, and I don't have everything out in front of me right this second, but the change in most organizations has been incremental. Would probably be the best way to put it, and probably the most encouraging way to put the type of year-over-year change that we're seeing so far. I think that there's certain companies that are doing a much better job than others, and I think that there's specific reasons for that. So, for instance, Slack is a company that I think is doing better than most in terms of how they're pushing and ushering things forward, and there's a reason for that. Slack went rather aggressively at bringing on a number of high-level hires who understand this space, this inclusion piece, and that's at great risk, because when you bring on folks who really understand what's going on and understand the depth of the problem and are really entrenched in the communities that they're looking to solve, that could present itself as a challenge to leadership, and that could present itself as you opening yourself up for some internal, some real shaky internal shit when you got people with very strong opinions that you're bringing into the fold. But because of that, they've been able to see some really, really interesting things happening that a lot of other organizations I think are going to take much longer to see. I'm hoping that that ends up being an example. But for us, the way that I look at it is, I'm less, and this is not, to say any one thing is less or more important than the other, but for me, I'm less interested in the percentage of, let's say black engineers that get hired at, XYZ startup. I'm more interested in what it looks like to present a better ecosystems locally around the country and then world to support early stage entrepreneurships in entrepreneurship in these communities. And then secondarily, I want to make sure that as we're seeing this influx of engineering talent, as we're seeing this influx of entrepreneurial talent, as we're seeing this influx of young people coming out of colleges really wanting to explore what it's like to launch a startup, what it's like to be involved in the VC space. As we're seeing that energy, how do we take those young people and make sure that they get the opportunities that they're really pushing hard to explore? And so that's a big reason for why we launched Groundwork. And we knew that it wasn't going to be an overnight thing. The thought process behind it is that we're going to lay the groundwork, literally lay the foundation for this next wave of entrepreneurial talent that is on their way. And how do I know it's on their way? Because from working at a Code 2040 and for doing events with the UNCF and doing other events out in the valley and all around the country, and even some stuff that we're working on again in South Africa, there are some very, very seriously intelligent, driven, hungry young people who want in. And the folks who are in right now, we have a responsibility to kick some doors open so that those young people don't end up running into the same walls that I ran into. If a young person today has the literally exact same challenges as I had starting my first startup 14, 15 years ago, then I haven't done my job, in my opinion. And, somebody should kick me out, and that's the way that should happen. And so that's the way we're looking at it. We're attacking this aggressively. And yeah, so I mean, I guess the shorter way to answer your question is, no, I'm not satisfied with the way things are going. But yes, I am encouraged with the way things are going.
I love your passion, and I think that's the perfect way to end this,
Yeah, yeah,
because without passion like that, you can't have it. I can tell that you love it. I
absolutely.
was talking with Jason Towns, managing director of Groundwork Ventures. You can learn about them at groundwork.vc.
.vc. Yes.
.vc. We'll have that in the show notes. Really appreciate your time today, Jason, and best of luck with everything, and looking forward
Thank
to
you.
staying in touch.
I appreciate it. Appreciate everything you guys are doing as well.